Lethal Company, and content warning. Oh, what is that?
Oh, what is that?
What? He's bought snails?
This is horrible! Horrible thing!
What the are two games that share roughly the same premise. You and up to 3 of your friends go into a spooky abandoned place in order to get either scrap or footage to feed an ever-growing quota within 3 days. And if you don't hit the desired amount of money or views in those 3 days, you have to start all over again at square one.
Confession.
I am taking this.
So why did two games that have incredibly similar gameplay loops of go to place, get objective, come out, purchase items with money, and go back to place feel so vastly different in the enjoyment of them? Why does Lethal Company feel so fun to play and something that feels like it's constantly replayable, while content warning feels like after the first few cycles of this gameplay loop, you've basically done everything? Firstly, I will acknowledge that content warning did come out much more recently than Lethal Company did, so it more than likely will get content updates, but the fact remains that Lethal Company was made by and is being updated by a singular person. Landfall Games might not be a major studio, but they have a lot more than one person on their team. For me, I think I can break it down to 5 different reasons I had such different experiences in these games: objective, enemies, maps, equipment, and isolation. I think you'll definitely want to stick around for the last one because it really ties everything together. Objectives are first, and while on the surface, the quota and view count needed to progress to the next cycle might seem like they're effectively the same thing, I don't think that could be further from the truth. In both games, every time you successfully complete the 3-day cycle, the amount of scrap or the amount of views that you need goes up. In Lethal Company, this involves the need for you to go further into the abandoned factories to get more scrap, the teamwork of needing someone on the ship to help you get through locked doors and communicate where scrap is on the monitor, and managing your inventory because you're probably going to bring a walkie-talkie and a flashlight, so you have limited space to pick up scrap, all the while making sure you make it back to the ship before your deadline of midnight. And what makes this harder is that the money you make off of scrap doesn't vary based on what your quota is. A hairbrush is only going to be worth so much money, and getting 1,000 credits in a day is the same difficulty when your quota is around 400 credits as it is when your quota goes over 1,000 credits. However, in content warning, you don't have this same need to go deeper into the facility because, at least in my experience, the monsters you need to film murdering your friends become much more plentiful as you get to more and more cycles. Not only that, but in content warning, because you only have a limited amount of film in your camera, views become easier to come by with each cycle, meaning that you really don't need to be recording more things or extra spooky things or even more dangerous things in order to reach your quota. This translates to the fact that getting 1,000 views in cycle 3 is insanely easier than getting 1,000 views in the very first cycle. This difference in your objective, where in one game the difficulty slowly grows, meaning you need to not only play better, but also take more risks on each day, where in the other game the difficulty is artificially produced by just spawning 50 times more enemies, gives a very clear show of why completing the objective in Lethal Company feels that much better in my opinion than it does in content warning. Speaking of difficulty, let's talk about the monsters you encounter in both games. Part of the difficulty of Lethal Company really does come from the wide variety of monsters that you encounter, from ones you can bargain with, to ones you need to not speak around, to ones that you can't let see you, to ones you can't not be looking at, and so on. There's not only a giant variety of different monsters that you'll encounter while you're getting scrap, but also a large variety of ways in which you have to deal with them. Each monster has a unique way to deal with it so you don't die, and adds a unique flavor to whatever level you're currently on, especially when you get into really annoying combinations and the paid moons, but we'll talk about maps later. Not to mention, every monster has its own unique AI that does its best to try to kill you, like the Brackern hiding in stairways to get you from behind without you noticing that it's there. However, in content warning, you don't get this same variety. In the time I've played the game, the majority of the enemy interactions boil down to get it on camera, and when it starts aggroing, run away as fast as possible. In fact, the only 2 enemies I've encountered that don't have the interaction of just running away are ones I like to call Mr. Steely Man and the Captcha Cage. Mr. Steely Man is a monster that disappears when light is shown on it, and if it gets to you, it will take an item from your inventory, meaning you need to keep a lookout for it so you don't lose items that get you views if they're on camera.
I definitely say go down. Oh my god, all of them are just down. Oh, that's bad. Oh Jesus! Oh god, Mr. Steely Man! Get out of here. No.
The capture cage are immobile monsters that will trap a player if you get too close and require another player to literally type in a specific set of characters, literally passing a captcha in order to let the other player out. But the rest of the cast of enemies lack variety in how you have to interact with them outside of what speed you need to run away from them with and how fucked you are if you get caught by one of them. In Lethal Company, I need to ask what monsters do I need to deal with this time and how do I deal with them while getting scrapped. Whereas in Content Warning, I need to ask what monsters am I running away from this time and did the person with the camera get it on film. Speaking about variety, it's time to talk about the maps in both games. Content Warning and Lethal Company vary wildly in their maps, not only in layout but also because the factories and mansions you find scrap in for Lethal Company are completely randomly generated. Well, if I'm not mistaken, Content Warning really only has 2 maps that it rotates you through. Major upside of Content Warning's approach is that if everyone dies, you're not going to make 0 money for the day because you can go back in and find the camera from your last run in the same spot where the camera person died and recover the footage from the last run. Major downside, you again have less variety, and once you know your way around the maps, it becomes really hard to get lost the same way that you can in Lethal Company's seemingly endless hallways, and yes, in my opinion, not being able to get lost is a downside, but I'll get into that when I talk about isolation. The level design for Content Warning's maps are also just not too stellar in my opinion, because while they do look very creepy, the zones within them either feel way too big or way too cramped, and due to the fact that there's collision with your friends and that the physics for players is so damn janky, if you're in a cramped place and your friends don't notice what's going on, you're gonna get ganged up on by the monsters. And while the monsters that spawn and their locations on the map are randomized, having a set map as opposed to randomly generated maps gets rid of the potential experiences that you can have. And due to the fact that the monsters can spawn anywhere and anytime, unlike in Lethal Company, you end up with monsters right outside of your ship the second that you start a day, and it's basically just not going to be a good time. Combine all of that together and you end up with experiences that feel way too similar, where it's just, oh, I'm going into the dark. Oh, what's that? A monster that I didn't see at all? Oh no! Over and over again, and it loses its horror element way too quickly. Moving on, let's talk about equipment and why it feels so meh in Content Warning for me, but so silly or necessary in Lethal Company. Outside of the camera, there's absolutely no pieces of equipment that I would consider necessary for Content Warning. Even the flashlights aren't really that necessary compared to Lethal Company, because even without adjusting my gamma to be a cheater, I can still see fairly well in dark places, and that's how the game is supposed to look because I never adjusted it from where it was when I first booted up the game. Not to mention that the better flashlights are basically not needed, because due to the fact that you have a limited amount of film on your camera, once it can't record anymore, there's no reason to keep going for the day, and you can just hop on back to the dive bell, which usually happens very soon after the base flashlights die, and pretty much never after any of the better ones die. There are some cool pieces of equipment like the goo ball or the shock stick, which can slow down enemies or let you shock them to hopefully prevent your death, and there's also microphones, which amplify any sound of what they're pointed at, but to such an insane degree that it basically tops out the game volume by just having them equipped. Besides that, you have emotes, heals, which I never used because enemies either one-shot you or can't kill you at all, and other items that technically help you get more views, but you're fine without them. Compare all of that to Lethal Company, where if you're running into a moon without a pro flashlight and a walkie-talkie, you're basically asking for a bad time of not knowing what's in the dark or where anyone else is, making them pretty much necessary to every run. And while Lethal Company does have non-necessary items like the ship horn, you also have non-necessary items like the teleporters, which can really help you either get out of a pinch or get into one. For the most part, the majority of items in Lethal Company, which there are a lot of, have some type of use that helps you in any of your runs, and without them would make the game feel much more stale much quicker. Even if we count the ship in each game as an item, the ship in Lethal Company is invaluable due to the fact that you can use it to spot loot, open doors, disable turrets, spot monsters, and direct your friends where to go, but in Content Warning, all it does is show you how far away someone is from the ship and how much oxygen they have left. I mean, come on, it doesn't even let you see if they're dead, which would be so helpful to know if you get separated. And speaking of being separated, let's talk about isolation. It's no secret that you as a team of 4 players need to approach moons in Lethal Company very differently than you approach the old world in Content Warning. A big part of that is that in Lethal Company, as the quota you need to meet gets larger and larger, you need to split up more often, cover as much ground as possible so you can find as much scrap as possible. This usually isn't too bad because you have a walkie-talkie to communicate with people, and you also have the guy on the ship who should be relatively okay for the majority of the time on a moon. So in Lethal Company, you'll still have some communication with your friends as you play out a day, until it happens. You turn on your walkie-talkie, unsure of where exactly in the facility you are because you've been wandering for so long looking for scrap, and no one answers. It's just radio silence.
TheTarians.
Dude, I would teleport you.
That's when Lethal Company stops being a fun gameplay experience with friends and becomes just a survival horror game, and you know that if the guy on the ship isn't responding, what chance do you even have to make it out of that factory alive? But in content warning, you don't really ever get separated. Because of the fact that only things on film make you money, there's no reason to split off from the person with the camera in the first place, and if monsters do come, you have ways of dealing with them, or you can generally just outrun them long enough for the person with the camera to get some good footage. Not to mention that the items you get are only helpful to make money if they're on camera, so regardless of what you do with them, if you're either not the person with the camera or not near the person with the camera, then they're useless. So in content warning, you never get this feeling of isolation and total creepiness because there's no reason to ever be alone unless you're actively trying to make it harder for yourself. And horror games thrive off of isolation. They thrive off of the ability of making you paranoid because you know no one is going to come to save you, and forcing people in a multiplayer horror game to split up rather than stick together is one of the best things that the game can do to retain that horror aspect. At the end of the day, I don't want people to think that I'm hating on content warning or that I hate the game. I know that Landfall Games is known for making more comedic games like TabG, and it really shows in content warning. However, for a game that is so clearly inspired by Lethal Company in my opinion, these areas that it lacks in makes the game feel stale way too fast, and I just can't get past that. The game is still massively fun due to the people that I play with, but coming from a studio of people and comparing it to a game made by a furry on Twitter, it's hard for me to say they're in the same league. I'm sure content warning will be getting plenty of updates, but as it stands now, I think I'm going to be sticking with Lethal Company as my game of choice. Plus, the mods make Lethal Company so much funnier. I mean, you're telling me I can make the Brackard into Freddy Fazbear? Sign me up!